The tax department has developed a formula, and they determine a projected net income for each soil type in Ohio based on a number of different factors. They take that projected net income and they divide it by what we call a capitalization rate. So basically they were assuming in this model that if somebody was purchasing property, they were using 40% equity, putting 40% down, and borrowing the remaining 60%. One of our recommendations was that they move that to an 80-20 split, 20% down, 80% borrowed. The other change we recommended for the cap rate was increasing the loan term from 15 years to a longer term. The tax department accepted that recommendation and have moved to a 25-year term.
Part of the reason the most recent values were even more out of touch, seemed even more out of touch with the current farm economy, was that the most recent data that they used for crop prices, pattern, and yields was 2 years old, and the most recent data they were using for production costs was a year old. And we found that they could reduce the data lag for crop prices, pattern, and yields down to a 1-year lag, and they could also eliminate the lag altogether for production costs.
Woodland is valued within the CAUV program by coming up with a cropland value, and then the tax department makes a deduction for clearing costs. And then in certain soils, most soils, they would make an additional $500 deduction for drainage costs. Those costs, as far as we can tell, have not been updated since the 1970s. We've made the suggestion in the past that they update those costs, and so again this year we made that an official recommendation. And they chose to increase those deductions for clearing to $1,000 and for drainage to $770. Now, we know that those still might be a little bit low, so we did also ask the tax department to continue reviewing those. We probably are still going to see increases in CAUV at least for another year or two because of the way the calculation works. But certainly that these changes that we recommended and the tax department has accepted will help to temper those increases.
We're actually recommending that the tax department adopt a different technique for calculating the cap rate. The method that the tax department currently uses is a very complex method, and it looks at some factors, some non-farm factors that we don't think ought to be included in the formula.
One of the concerns that we hear is that the value for conservation lands or forest land in general, again, those are non-productive for income purposes, but they're very beneficial for the environment. So we're continuing to explore the idea of putting those lands at minimum value or some lower set value.
Currently in the calculation, they do include an average millage rate on the agricultural land in the state, but that average is quite low, especially compared to what the millage rates we see when we're looking at our most vulnerable farmland near urban centers. So we've asked the tax department to review whether it's appropriate to use that average. We do know that the tax department has increased the minimum value based on the general trend of increase in values over the years. We think that the tax department should review whether they should actually increase those or just allow that minimum value to stay at one place and allow the calculation to work to increase.